When people move to a new country, a lot of times they'll say that learning the language is the hardest part. And ironically, for me, it was actually the opposite. I moved to the US when I was just 5 years old. I was born and raised in Beijing, China for all my life. So I came to America with basically zero English knowledge at all, no idea of any of the vocabulary or words or how to spell out anything at all. So my first year in an American school was my first grade year. And that year, I went into the first day not knowing anything. And there was a special teacher arranged for me that had to translate everything from English to Chinese for me. And I felt awkward, out of place. But I remember after a few months of her doing that, just the amount of time she had to translate to me just started to decrease. And I began to just understand what the people around me were saying more and more. And because I was surrounded in such an environment, however, that's actually not the point I want to talk about in this video, because for me, learning the language was actually not really a challenging part. Just because I was young and I was able to learn and adapt to my surroundings pretty quickly. One of the biggest culture shocks I remember was definitely during lunch. So every day for school, my grandpa would wake up early and he would make either his steamed dumplings or fried rice. I would have that every day with some fruit on the side and this drink from H Mart that I liked, and I loved my lunch. I could probably eat that same thing and never get tired of it. But what really bothered me was when I looked around and everyone just seemed to be eating the same lunch. When I looked around, it was like sandwiches, pizzas, noodles, spaghetti, juice boxes, chips. People were like asking to share, like, could you give me a cookie? Could you give me that? And no one ever asked me to share my food. I didn't get any food from anyone else either. Later, I figured out it was because my lunch was so complex and I only had one spoon. There was no way I could really share my lunch. So I ended up just eating my lunch on my own while everyone around me was sharing and just chatting. And honestly, that was probably a big turning point. Over time, I kind of just started to dread lunch every single day because I felt like I was the odd one out. And especially as an introverted kid growing up, I was shy and I just didn't speak up at all in class. And so, especially for me, all I wanted to do was just to fit in and be like everyone else. But at the same time, I just couldn't bring up the courage to tell my grandpa or my dad, who was also making lunch for me, like, could you just make me a sandwich or just make me something else? Because pretty much at that time, everything we made, everything we ate at home was mainly Chinese food. Like, we were very much a Chinese family all the way. I also remember when I was in like second and third grade, throughout elementary school, I was constantly invited to birthday parties from these friends that I sort of knew. They invited like 20 people. I remember the one party being ice skating, another was watching movie at a movie theater and doing baking. All of those things along with like the pizza and the cakes, the cupcakes that came along with those birthday parties. I just thought that was like such a cool aspect of American culture, because in China, like, pizza didn't even exist back then. And also just those sort of places I've actually never been to before ever since I came to America. Those birthday parties were actually some of the first times I was exposed to any of those events and activities. When I was younger, I think I spent most of my time in China, like either on the playground, outside the apartment that we lived in, or just going to the mall with my mom. It was very strong contrast compared to my life in China growing up as a kid. I've also been invited to birthday parties where we went to that person's house and they would have like special people come over and they would have their birthday parties there, whatever sort of event it was. But I was pretty surprised how everyone lived in like pretty detached houses. Everyone had like backyard. It could be small or big or whatever, but they had a backyard, they had a balcony, and they had like a lot of space to themselves, and the houses weren't that close to each other. And that was the first time I actually saw something like that, because in China, like, I lived in this apartment, right? It was like 18 floors. I lived on the fifth floor, and Pretty much all the buildings are very close to each other. If not, they're just very big, very tall buildings. You didn't really have your own backyard or anything like that. But over time, we realized that those houses are pretty common here in the US, which is basically the complete opposite of living in Beijing at the time. So 10 years later, I'm currently a sophomore in high school, and more or less I've adapted to the American culture a lot more. Sometimes I still miss the atmosphere and the surroundings of my old home in China, and sometimes I'll just think about my life growing up there. But I think the biggest thing about moving to a country, at least in my case, was not learning the language. I feel like learning the language is more so like a natural thing. If you're in such a surrounding, you're bound to learn the language and be exposed to it. So eventually you can improve upon it. But for me, it was more of like the interactions and the social life and just how the culture and the traditions were. I think that's what really shocked me when I first came here. I wasn't prepared for how different like the everyday lifestyle would look and how people around me were pretty much all just used to it. And I was like thinking this is so new. I didn't know what was going on. This is something I understand a lot better now. I feel like people can embrace this aspect of growing up as well. And I hope that the people who have went through similar experiences as me can embrace those very experiences and the memories that they made. They definitely have played a role in who you have become today and ultimately your future as well. I think in a way, reflecting on your past and just seeing how things are so much more different now and how much you've grown is such a rewarding feeling, but also it gives you the sense of happiness and the sense of joy to truly see how far you've come.